It is the summer of 1943, the second summer of the war for Americans. Workers, the Douglas airplane plant at Palm Beach, are enjoying a special company event out on the airfield apron. Everyone's awaiting the arrival of the star guest attraction, as the band plays the top hit of the day. It is a bomber, a B-17 Flying Fortress in full battle camouflage. The crowds have come to see the first B-17 Flying Fortress to return to the United States from war-torn Europe, and to pay tribute to the bomber's crew, as the pilot, Captain Bob Morgan, beats up the airfield, roaring over the heads of the crowd at well below regulation height. Although some are so engrossed as to miss the landing of the bomber altogether, which Morgan skillfully brings to rest in its appointed place of honour. But why have these Douglas aircraft workers poured out onto the airfield to celebrate the arrival of this Boeing Fortress? Why the applause, the band, the ceremonial, the air of rejoicing? The answer is simply that this aircraft, the Memphis Belle, and more importantly her 8th Air Force crew, are at this time unique. They have brought the smoke of battle, the reality of a distant European war, to a people who know nothing of that struggle, other than the brief radio and newsreel reports. This lady has been to that war that now seems so far away. These 10 young Americans have flown and survived 25 bombing missions over Europe. They have become national heroes. But there's nothing that Bob Morgan, the captain, can say to this sunlit Californian audience to bring to life the reality of facing time and time again the exploding anti-aircraft shells and the attacking fighters to carry a bomb load to an enemy target. There's no way that he can begin to convey, on that idyllic Palm Beach summer's day, the gnawing fear, the rasping oxygen at 25,000 feet. The sheer physical strain of keeping a 30-ton bomber in the tight formation that was essential for their survival against the onslaught of German fighters. Fighters flown with skill and fierce determination against the American bomber formations. These air gunners, the fortress's only defense, opened fire on the attackers, young men fighting for their collective lives with 50 caliber machine guns, against the heavy 20mm cannon of the German Focke-Wulf 190 fighters. Once the fortress has been hit, it becomes a cripple. It falls out of the protective formation, and a fighter closes in for the kill.
Coming around the 10. Watch, shall keep your eyes open.
They're breaking 11, breaking 11.
I got him.
As the Belle's gunners fight for their survival and score a hit.
I got my sights on him.
Check that B-17.
Another damaged fortress strays from its station. The formation reaches the start of the bombing run over the target, and all around the deadly anti-aircraft shells explode. The bombs fall away to the German target 25,000 feet below. While yet another B-17 dies.
B-17 out of control at 3 o'clock.
Come on, you guys, get out of that plane. Bail out.
Only a few parachutes emerge. But the crew of the Memphis Belle survived their 25th mission over enemy territory, the first of the mighty 8th Air Force to achieve that. Their tour of duty and danger is at an end. Safely back at base, Bob Morgan acknowledges the cheers of the ground crews. The waist gunners know they've faced the enemy fighters for the last time. Bombardier and co-pilot, happy men both, soon to be going home, going stateside, to Asheville, North Carolina, Fort Worth, Texas, to Green Bay, Wisconsin, Chicago, Spokane and Detroit. But first, Captain Bob Morgan pays tribute to the Memphis Belle, which has carried them safely time and time again through that hell over Europe. Today, at Palm Beach, in front of this applauding crowd, that hell must seem like another planet. But the crowd surged forward with a curious reverence towards the Memphis Belle, which has become the symbol of that war. They want to touch and leave their mark on the battle-scarred bomber. Eager hands scribbling, signing on any surface of the fortress. They sign their names with anything on anything, with crayons, pencils, fountain pens, lipstick. It was almost as if victory had already been won on that summer's day in Palm Beach with the jazz band playing. But victory was in fact all too far away, indeed might never be won. The setting, an English farmyard, witnessing the slowly changing seasons, with the village church, little changed for centuries. But in May 1943, this was the gateway to a battlefront. It was Station 121 of the United States 8th Army Air Force. The peace of the ancient farmyard was now shattered by brash newcomers. These B-17s belonged to 324 Squadron of the 91st Bombardment Group, one squadron of one group of the mighty 8th Air Force ranged right across Britain. The bombers are quiet at dispersal, only the ever-present distant running of aircraft engines to break into the quiet of the English countryside. But the quiet is wholly deceptive, for this is undoubtedly a battlefront. This meadow-fringed base on the edge of a village is the front line of the new war in the air. The fact that this powerful strike force existed at all by the summer of 1943 was little short of a miracle. A little over a year earlier, when the cigar-chomping General Ira Aker had been sent over to create the 8th Air Force, he had nothing. No planes, no crews, no airfields, no spares, no supplies. Within a year, he was well on the way to creating this immense force able to strike fear into the heart of any enemy. It would have over 4,000 aircraft to throw into battle. And a major part of the miracle was that everything about it, every item, had to be shipped from the US. All the tools, spare parts, aviation gasoline, oil, guns, ammunition, food, clothing, medical supplies, trucks, everything needed to create and maintain a vast air force had to be shipped across the Atlantic. Every spanner, every nut and bolt, every last item. Both the air crews and the ground crews were assigned an aircraft. It was theirs, both to fly and to keep in first-rate flying condition. The aircraft are Boeing B-17Es, the definitive version of the wartime flying fortress. Maximum speed, 317 miles an hour. Bomb load, 4,000 pounds. Range, 3,200 miles. It was armed with no less than 11 50 caliber machine guns, hence its name. And it was a tough old bird. It could take a huge amount of punishment, and often did, and still stay in the air. It carried 2,000 gallons of aviation gasoline, and the fuel, like everything else, has been shipped at great risk across the Atlantic in tankers. Today, a raid is being prepared. One by one, 36 bombers at Station 121 are fueled and await bombing up. Though as always, there is one that is a reluctant ship, with the ground crew harried by their crew chief to clear the last-minute snags. In this case, the number 2 engine was misfiring when tested. It will be serviceable by takeoff time. Meanwhile, well away from everything else, the bomb dump. Though bombs were unfused, and therefore supposedly safe, nevertheless handling them was never without risk. Already at one American base, an unfused bomb had exploded, setting off the entire dump of 1,200 tons of high explosive, killing 5 men and destroying 5 bombers. The bombs, still unfused, are taken on special carriers to the waiting aircraft. Men may seem relaxed, but they know only too well how dangerous this job is. Indeed, in May 1943, at about the time this actual film was shot, at a nearby base there had been another accident. A 500-pound bomb exploded, setting off several more. 18 men died, 25 were injured, 4 B-17s were written off, and a further 11 badly damaged. These men must have known of that accident. They're fusing the same type of bomb as the one which exploded. The bombs were fitted with several different types of fuses. Some intended to delay the explosion of the bomb once it had been dropped, from an hour or so to several days, to cause maximum disruption at the target. The actual locking pin will only be removed by the armourer when the bomb has been secured in the aircraft's bomb bay. But even so, the bomb is now undoubtedly live, ready to be lifted into the waiting bomb bays. The small windmill is fitted to arm the bomb as it falls away from the aircraft. And dropped from 25,000 feet, these bombs achieve a terminal velocity of 750 miles an hour, breaking the sound barrier and then smashing through steel and concrete before exploding. They are carefully, very carefully, loaded into the waiting aircraft. The B-17s are now ready to go to war, fueled, bombed up, awaiting their crews. It is now 07:30 in the morning. At 0800, the pilots, navigators and bombardiers, all officers, troop in for the briefing. No one knows the target yet, although the rumours are rife. It's to be a tough one, into Germany itself. The bomber group's commanding officer unveils the target. It's to be the German naval docks at Wilhelmshaven. For Bob Morgan on the left here, this raid has a particular tension. It is his 25th mission, the last of his tour. The CO gives details of the raid, the route, the enemy defences, the flak and the fighters. They will be severe in defence of a key naval target. The squadron will fly as 4 flights of 3 aircraft. Bob Morgan will lead B flight with the Memphis Belle. All the men in the room know that their very survival depends on this formation strategy, each aircraft covering its neighbour. All the watches are synchronised. These men also know full well that some will not make it back to the safety of this base. As the last of the bombs are loaded, the 10-man crew of the Memphis Belle go through a routine that is all too familiar. Bob Morgan walks to his aircraft. He's wearing long RAF flying boots. They were much prized as they didn't come off if you had to bail out. He checks the flight plan with the navigator and talks briefly to the crew that has been through so much together. The gunners know the score. They know that flying by day into the swarms of enemy fighters is a tough business, and that knowledge has formed immensely strong bonds between these men. Each one of them knows that he depends upon the others to the ultimate degree. The least favoured crew position was undoubtedly in the ball turret. The gunners were cramped into these tiny turrets. But all the gunners had a tough job. 4 engines are American White Cyclone radials, delivering nearly 5,000 horsepower in total. They have their problems, but they are tough and reliable. They can carry this 30-ton bird deep into Germany and back. As the Memphis Belle climbs away over the neatly laid out English countryside, the elements of the bomber fleet begin to form up into their close formations, on which the whole of the US daylight bombing strategy stands or falls. With the big raid, that formation could take up to an hour to assemble. All the while the enemy is listening out for breaches of radio silence to gain early warning of a raid. Bob Morgan, as flight leader, skillfully eases the Memphis Belle into position with minute control and throttle adjustments, aware that every move he makes affects the other aircraft. Formation flying calls for skill and concentration at any time. When it involved these big and heavily laden bombers, it brought a powerful additional pressure onto the pilots. Once formed up, the bombers climb away at 140 miles an hour, each plane burning aviation fuel at 400 gallons an hour, the big turbocharged engines working flat out. Higher and higher into the thinning air. Throttles needing constant adjustment to keep in formation. Co-pilot Jim Verinis watches the cylinder head temperatures and oil pressures on the hard-pressed air-cooled engines. Sergeant Bob Hansen copies a routine radio message from 8th Air Force headquarters. In the nose, the bombardier, Captain Vince Evans. Flight engineer Sergeant Harold Locke from Green Bay, Wisconsin, takes up his position manning the top turret, armed with twin 50 caliber machine guns. Film director Major William Wyler checks a camera from Memphis Belle, the movie, of a real live raid. Sergeant Quinlan, teenage tail gunner, begins to quarter the sky behind the aircraft. The ball gunner squeezes into his small domain, as the formation will now be showing up on German radar. Captain Morgan calls to the crew, 10,000 feet, put on oxygen masks. 10,000 feet and still climbing hard to the operational height of 25,000 feet, 5 miles high. Captain Chuck Layton, the navigator, keeps the plot. The formation is heading for a point on the British East Coast, the point of departure for the target on Germany's Baltic coast. The whole plane vibrates and thunders with the noise of those engines. They're on track. Each man, though vigilant, is alone with his thoughts about this mission. Many aircraft have been destroyed on or near the 25th raid. The number is no protection. "20,000 feet and still climbing. All the aircraft are arranged to a careful plan, evolved by the 8th Air Force's brilliant tactician, Colonel Curtis LeMay. There was a high squadron and a low squadron, each stacked up to afford the heaviest fields of fire against the formation's deadliest threat, the fighters of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force. To hold these formations called for constant alertness on the part of the pilots. For bombers to fly close was to risk collision. To drop out of formation was to risk being shot down. The eastern coast of England slips below. Ahead, the cold North Sea and the hostile enemy coast. There's the low squadron in position. At last, the formation is at operational height, 25,000 feet. This is the outer limit of the air war in the 1940s. As the ships level off in the cruise, the fuel consumption drops to 200 gallons an hour, though some rogue engines are known as gas hogs and have to be watched to stop them draining the tanks. For all the crews in all the aircraft, this is the tension-filled no man's land between the departing friendly coastline and the approaching hostile attack zone. The ice on the perspex reveals the harsh world outside. As they cross the enemy coast, the high squadron begins to create the dreaded contrails. Water vapor from the exhaust turning to a stream of ice crystals. On a clear day, it tells the enemy all he wants to know about the incoming bombers: their height, their direction, their number. Flying in broad daylight was bad enough. Having the aircraft's positions signaled by the condensation trails could invite disaster. But the enemy has radar too, and the approaching formations are now being plotted. This original 1943 graphic revealed the deception measures taken to keep the enemy guessing. The dummy raids were mounted to stop the enemy fighters concentrating on one raid.
Here are his defenses. Airdromes, well dispersed. Each plane indicates a staffo, or squadron of fighters. Heavy anti-aircraft, highly trained and accurate, all along the coast and defending his vital installations. Radar to warn him of our coming. Here is our plan to divide his defenses and weaken his opposition. At 13:30 hours, shortly after takeoff, 6 groups of planes will be heading toward the enemy coast from 6 directions. The Blue Force, 100 B-24 Liberator 4-engine bombers. The White Force, 300 B-17 Flying Fortresses. The Green Force, 300 B-17s, with an escort of 6 squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts. A force of B-26 Marauders, twin-engine medium bombers, with 6 squadrons of RAF Spitfires escorting. Almost 1,000 planes and over 8,000 men in the air. The enemy alerts all his airdromes. But which is our main force? What are our targets? Where should the Nazi controllers send their fighters? It's our job to make them guess, and guess wrong. A half hour later, at 1400 hours, the Blue Force will be heading east across the North Sea, with the White Force following. These enemy fighters are tied down, waiting to meet them, and will not be able to attack the Green Force. These fighters must come up to attack the Green Force, and thus will be no threat to the Blue and White Forces. The B-26s and Spitfires will bomb and strafe a key rail junction, diverting these 6 Staffeln and preventing the enemy from concentrating too many fighters on the Green Force, which is scheduled to bomb an aircraft factory at Hanover. At 1430 hours, the Blue Force will threaten this entire coastal area of northwestern Germany. Which target will it be? Flensburg? The Kiel Canal? Or will it turn suddenly and bomb Hamburg, Wegesack, or Emden? Actually, it carries no bombs at all. It's a decoy and keeps the fighters from the northern area busy while the White Force, the main effort, heads for the submarine pens of Wilhelmshaven.
Thank heaven the contrails have ceased, for the formation is now over Germany itself. Below, fighters are about to scramble, and the anti-aircraft gunners are watching their radar plots to get the height, the course and the speed of the bombers. The tight formations close up even tighter. Guns are cocked. All the crews are tense, awaiting the enemy's first strike. For there, 25,000 feet below, is the enemy coast. It is the gateway to Fortress Europe, and it is heavily defended. Bob Morgan, for all his youth and old hand, knows that they're entering the most critical and the most vulnerable phase of the entire mission. The bombers are at the initial point, the start of the bombing run to the target. The bombardier now effectively controls the aircraft to bring it directly over the target, the German naval base of Wilhelmshaven. The entire formation must hold its position straight and level from this point all the way to the target. They're sitting ducks. There can be no evasive measures, no twists and turns to escape from the anti-aircraft fire erupting all around the bombers. The German 88mm flak guns are the best in the world. They have the height precisely right. The heavy shells are exploding directly in the path of the aircraft. The Memphis Belle is now fully committed to its bombing run. On the ground, smoke pots are set off in an attempt to obscure the vital docks, but the ground wind is too light. Meanwhile, the guns set up an intense box barrage, a wall of bursting shells through which the bombers must fly. A near miss, so close the heavy bomber is rocked by the blast. Morgan adjusts the throttles to maintain formation. Vince Evans, the bombardier, crouches over his sight, seemingly oblivious to the flak, intent on watching 2 pointers slowly coming together. But now the first fighters attack, even flying through their own flak, eager to get at the fat buses, as they called the B-17s. Vince Evans must ignore the battle. When he drops the Belle's bombs, all the flight will follow his lead. Another Focke-Wulf wheels into the attack. All filmed by an unknown cameraman, standing at an open hatch in a -20 degrees, 200-mile-an-hour wind, calmly shooting remarkable action shots. Like this Focke-Wulf 190, intent on killing him. Another bursting shell rocks the left-hand bomber into a near collision with the Memphis Belle. A B-17 up above is hit and begins to trail smoke, but it holds to the bombing run. The flak gets thicker, and the pilot struggles to keep the Memphis Belle straight and level. Where is this target? When will it come? To all the crew, the final run over the target seems like an age, passing in slow motion. Bombs gone. The formation follows. The target is enveloped in smoke and flames. Sergeant Quinlan, the tail gunner, reports that the target is obscured by a pall of smoke. Now turned at last, turned for home. Despite all the bursting shells and the fighter attacks, the formation has held together. But home, the airfield amongst the English meadows, is a long way away. The flak stops. That can only mean one thing: fighters. The top gunner opens fire, spent cartridge cases spilling out all around him. It is the waist gunners that have most of the action, as the fighters wheel in from the side, cannons blazing. Remember, these gunners are filmed in action by a combat cameraman. They're not Hollywood actors, but young Americans scared to death, fighting for their lives at 25,000 feet in an alien sky.
Check that B-17, Chuck. 3 o'clock. Loader smoking. Fighter's 10:30 coming around.
Those 10:30 upper or lower? B-17 out of control at 3 o'clock.
Come on, you guys, get out of that plane. Bail out.
There's one. He come out of the bomb bay. Yeah, I see him.
There's a tail gunner coming out.
Watch out for fighters. Keep your eye on him, Bill.
See any parachutes, Quinlan?
2 parachutes. Black at 9 o'clock. 8 men still in that B-17.
Come on.
Get out of there. There's 3 more shoots.
Flak, 11 o'clock.
Fighters, 6 o'clock.
ME-109 at 3 o'clock.
Keep after him, would you? I see him. I'm on him. Come on, use him. I got him.
Quinlan, confirm that fighter.
He got him, Chief. Look, he's bailing out.
Don't yell on that intercom. Fighters, 10 o'clock.
Watch those 2 at 12, Van. They're coming in.
They're coming in, Scotty.
Get that ball turret on him. Save the ammunition.
possible.
Watch that fighter coming in the 3 o'clock.
He's coming in a half roll. Pull her up, Chief. Pull her up.
As the bombers near the coast, the formation, with wounded crews and tired pilots, has opened up. The fighters home in on the stragglers. Another crippled B-17. And cripples are doomed as they slide out of the protection of the formation. At last, the enemy coast. Only the North Sea now lies between the bombers and base. Now it's a case of nursing the engines and coaxing battle-damaged bombers home. Below the Memphis Belle, with agonizing slowness, the low squadron of the 91st heads westward towards that English airfield. At the home airfield, all is still. It is the worst time of waiting. Waiting for the distant drone of the returning bombers, their bombers, carrying roommates and off-duty friends who took off this morning on yet another dangerous mission. They try now not to notice the rows of waiting ambulances. Time passes slowly as the ETA, the estimated time of arrival, approaches. A false alarm as a damaged B-24 from the Blue Deception Force makes an emergency landing. But even as the B-24 lands, there is the sound of those distant engines. The RAF liaison officer and 2 WAFs watch from the control tower. And there's no mistaking it now. Here they come, just specks in the sky. 1,000 men count specks. Some hurry to the dispersal point to wait. Those with binoculars try to read the aircraft numbers. Coloured flares, that means wounded on board, to alert the medics and the ambulances. The men in the base hospital know what that means, to have suffered an agonizing, pain-racked journey home on the metal floor of a freezing bomber. The bombers with wounded on board are given priority to land. As the first bomber makes its landing approach, those watching wonder how many and how badly wounded are they. The bomber was hit by 20mm explosive cannon shells from a German fighter. The radio man and a gunner hit by shrapnel, serious but not fatal. The pilot flew the plane back, though suffering from a badly injured leg. Some paid the ultimate price. A gunner in one plane is too badly hurt to be moved. A doctor gives him a blood transfusion by the gun he manned. Six more B-17s returned to base. 36 left that morning. 20 have landed. The 21st lands without a scratch. Desperate Journey lives up to her name, returning with a feathered prop on a dead No. 2 engine. Another plane makes it on 3. Southern Comfort made it home this time with substantial damage. This B-17 made it back with all her rudder missing. The pilot got an immediate DFC. The 26th to land, no damage at all. In the Bassingbourn control tower, They know that 2 more, short of fuel, have landed at RAF airfields. The tally is 28, returned out of that 36 that took off. Number 29 makes a poor landing. Both their pilots have been injured. Dame Satan was hit by an exploding shell that blew out oxygen cylinders and damaged the undercarriage. The damage inflicted by a German fighter's 20mm cannon shells is all too evident, but time and time again, the B-17 demonstrated its ability to go on flying on a wing under prayer. The crewmen can indeed smile at their skill and good fortune. They've been through hell and returned to tell the tale. This one made it home after a number 3 engine fire burnt through wing and elevator. They owe their lives to self-sealing fuel tanks, to the undoubted skill of the pilots and the toughness of the Boeing airframe. And they will be able to recall the precise details of these flights for years afterwards, perhaps all their lives. Old Bill made it home, just. It was attacked head-on and raked with cannon shells. The navigator was killed, both pilots wounded, as was the bombardier, the top turret gunner, and the radio man. Out of the entire 10-man crew, only 2 gunners were not injured. Colonel Curtis LeMay himself was on hand to get information on German fighter tactics. Tension released, the crewmen talk out the mission. These young Americans have seen too many of their fellow countrymen die. They only want to talk among themselves. They don't welcome cameramen intruding on their shock and private grief. In the Bassingbourn Tower, the group commander, Colonel Ray, is still watching and waiting for more aircraft to return. It is the final flight, led by the ship that everyone had hoped would make it this day, the Memphis Belle. Bob Morgan circles his plane over the Bassingbourn field. The navigator and the bombardier celebrate the end of this, their final mission. These guns have fired their last shot in anger. The gunners know that against all the odds, they too have survived unscathed. This could be the final approach that the Memphis Belle will ever make at an English airfield. The Belle has landed. What thoughts flood through Bob Morgan's mind as he eases his plane to rest? The relief, the sheer joy to have won through and be back at base is writ large on the faces of the crew. They can scarcely contain their jubilation. They have been through so much together. Their war may now be over, but they will remain comrades for life. A few days after the final mission, Brigadier General Hayward Hansell from 8th Air Force Bomber Command decorated the crew of the Memphis Belle with a Distinguished Flying Cross. 4 officers of the 6 enlisted men added the award to the proudly worn 8th shoulder badge. Each man is personally congratulated by the young general, himself a pilot. As another fortress taxis out on another mission, the officers and crew stand to attention in the aircraft's slipstream, each with his newly awarded decoration earned in the toughest air front of the entire war. The 9th of June, 1943, a final parade of honour. The man who created the 8th General Ira Aker himself arrives to give Captain Morgan his last orders. With the crew at attention, in their flight jackets, the General issues Morgan with orders for a 26th mission, to fly the Memphis Belle back to the United States, to pass on his and his crew's invaluable experience in fighting the enemy to the thousands of aircrew in training there. What no one on that June day could know was that the Memphis Belle apart, not one of the other aircraft seen in this film would survive the war, and very few of the crews. For the 91st Bombardment Group went on to lose a total of 197 B-17s in action, the highest losses of any group in the 8th. For this was not the victory, this was not the end, it was only the beginning. The mighty 8th went on to mount some of the most daring bombing missions of the entire war in pursuit of that objective, to dismantle the German war machine. In doing so, it lost over 5,500 bombers, each with its crew of 10 young American airmen. B-17 Fortresses of the American 8th Army Air Force fly high over occupied Europe towards their target. The intense cold of the stratosphere instantly freezing the moisture of the exhausts into icy condensation trails. Beautiful on film, but to the wartime air crews, they were the deadly telltale that betrayed the bomber formations to the waiting fighter aircraft.
Planes, 9 o'clock, coming around. Keep your eye on them, boy.
Coming around to 10.
Watch them, Chuck. Keep your eyes open.
Yeah.
They're breaking 11, breaking 11.
I got him.
I got those 2 at 2 o'clock.
I got my sights on them.
Check that B-17, Chuck, 3 o'clock. Loader smoking.
B-17 out of control.
B-17 spirals earthwards, its 10-man crew trapped within. Despite their punishing losses, the young air crew, 3,000 miles from home, continue to fly on these perilous daylight missions into the enemy heartland. Before the mighty 8th, America had never had a long-range bomber force. It had never needed one. So this was an experiment, a new departure on a huge scale. Day one had been on the 17th of August 1942, the base Grafton Underwood in England, United States Army Air Force Station 106. Their primary weapon was the Flying Fortress, which took its name from the remarkable number of guns it carried. But the key question was, could it survive in daylight combat against battle-hardened German fighter pilots? These are the first who are about to test the belief that these big aircraft can fly by day and survive the onslaught of flak and fighters. General Ira Aker, creator and commander of this brand new strike force, addresses his men.
We've been doing a great deal of very hard work, and I know how eager everybody's been to get on an actual operation. It's here. We're going to work.
And General Acre was no mere talking general. He flew on that historic first mission in Ship 23, appropriately named Yankee Doodle. The pilots do it the hard way. Enlisted crewmen go through the conventional hatch. But the waist gunners do the entire trip, standing in open gun ports. On this still calm August day, this historic bomber force is launching an offensive that will go on without cease for over 1,000 days to come. The bombers climb out over an English countryside, golden with the harvest, to wait for the remaining aircraft to lift off. Then they form into flights of 3. This was the very key to the US bombing strategy. By daylight, they were immensely vulnerable targets. Each plane could only survive if it was covered by its neighbour's guns. Today, the target is a soft one, a railway marshalling yard at Rouen, just a hop across the channel into German-occupied France. Among the pilots is Major Paul Tibbets on his very first raid. 3 years later, he was to pilot the B-29 to drop the atom bomb over Hiroshima. The lead bombardier checks his optical Norden bomb sight. This was the latest US secret weapon, claimed to give them a pinpoint accuracy from 20,000 feet. Bomb doors open, and 37,000 pounds of general-purpose demolition bombs straddle the target. On that first raid, only a single German fighter attacked the formation, and he was claimed shot down by a B-17 gunner. Anti-aircraft fire damaged one fortress, but it made it home. It was a gentle baptism for a bomber force that was to go through hell on earth over the next 3 years. No doubt to the intense relief of his superior, General Spaatz, General Acre returned without a scratch. But the general, chomping on his cigar, knew only too well the mountain that had to be climbed.
Today is the first time the American heavy bombers have been in action in this theater, manned by American crews and American squadrons. General Acre, commanding the Bomber Command, led this flight, and he may like to say a few words.
Yes, our target was a marshalling yard and a roundhouse for the repair of locomotives. A very large one and a very important one to the German effort.
And for the US home newsreels, a carefully staged debrief of one crew.
Yes, we got a pretty good burst in our left wing, and looks like some shrapnel in our tail surface.
Nobody in the crew?
Horizontal tail. No, no one was injured.
Nobody hit. Well, as near as you could tell, did all the boys get into the target?
Practically all the bombs hit somewhere on the target, and the main bunch of them hit right where they were supposed to.
It was indeed only a start, but the build-up was rapid and relentless. Remember, for this new Air Force, every aircraft, every airman, every bomb, nut and bolt, and spare part to keep it operational had to be ferried across the Atlantic. It was a remarkable operation, never before attempted by America or anybody else for that matter. And with growing confidence from January 1943, the 8th began to tackle the real objective, to dismantle the mighty German war machine. It was a tough objective, perhaps an impossible one. It meant flying deep into the enemy heartland to attack vital targets such as aircraft factories and oil refineries and ball bearing plants, like the key one at Schweinfurt, attacked first on a famous raid in August 1943. These target names became the epitaphs of thousands of young Americans lost in the cause of unescorted daylight bombing. The Hunters, deadly Messerschmitt Me-109G fighters, armed with 20mm cannon. Fast, beautifully flown, the fighters pounced on the stragglers, their cannon easily outranging the B-17's machine guns. In 1943, German fighters were destroying well over 10% of bombers sent on each daylight raid, often much more. For all their toughness, B-17s, racked by deadly cannon fire, were cut out of the sky. This was the best anti-aircraft gun of the entire war, the German 88. It could hurl a shell 5 miles straight up into the tight formations of the daylight bombers. This gun became a killing machine. Despite flak and fighters, the American belief in, one might almost say obsession with daylight bombing, went on, thanks only to the immense courage of those aircrews who climbed back into their aircraft day after day to go back into that merciless battle. Any bomber which for any reason dropped back and left a defensive formation was pounced upon like a wounded animal. A single parachute opens. That means 9 men remain in the stricken fortress. German fighters, working in pairs, often attack both sides of a bomber. The fortress's gunners desperately try to bring their guns to bear on the attackers. But the classic fighter attack was from astern. Silence the rear gunner and then close in for the kill. The heavy explosive cannon shells inflicted immense damage. The best German fighter was the Focke-Wulf FW-190. It was actually called the Butcher Bird. The German pilots signaled their success. They believed firmly that they could win this war of attrition. As the fighters are refueled and rearmed, young Luftwaffe pilots, like their RAF counterparts in the summer of 1940, are jubilant at their success against the Americans' fat buses, as they called the B-17. All too many of them lay shattered in woods and fields along the flight path. German fighter pilots often went to examine their kills before they were collected and taken to one of the huge dumps of crashed enemy bombers. This is a mountain of salvaged bomber engines. Nearby, the wreckage of fuselages and wings, mainly American. But ironically, there's also the lone skeleton of an RAF Wellington, a victim of an early British attempt at this strategy of daylight bombing. Early on in the war, the Vickers Wellington had been the mainstay of RAF's bombing offensive against Germany. At that time, the RAF also believed that modern bombers, with defensive guns, could defend themselves against fighter attack even in daylight raids. That was a strategy on which RAF crews were trained and briefed, that they could make effective attacks by day and survive. They were very quickly proved wrong. Despite the fact that the Wellington was, for its time, immensely strong, with reasonable speed, and with twin 4.5 power-operated gun turrets, it was totally inadequate to deal with attacks from skilled German fighters. It was a lesson we learned the hard way. 24 Wellington crews had been briefed for a raid on the big enemy naval docks at Wilhelmshaven. It was intended to vindicate the theory of daylight bombing operations. It proved to be a disaster. The bombers were immediately detected by radar and fighters were scrambled. Messerschmitt 109Es, flown by battle-hardened pilots who had fought in the defeat of Poland. Directed by ground controllers, the fighters climb towards their targets. They make visual contact and close in on the RAF bombers to make attacks from each side, well out of reach of the fore and aft gun turrets. Of the 24 Wellingtons, over half were badly damaged or totally destroyed. It was the end of RAF daylight bombing. From then on, the RAF bombed by night, as indeed the Germans had after their heavy daylight losses in the Battle of Britain. From early 1943, 4-engine heavies of the RAF, of which by far the best was the Avro Lancaster, led the relentless bombing offensive against Germany. They flew by night. Night after night, hundreds of Lancasters, Stirlings and Halifaxes took off to fly across a blacked-out Europe. It was undoubtedly safer, if less accurate. To achieve greater accuracy, coloured flares were dropped by special Pathfinder bombers, equipped with electronic navigation aids to mark the target. But it was always accepted that with this area bombing philosophy, there would be widespread civilian casualties, collateral damage, as it's called today. Many RAF night targets would have been attacked by the US 8th Air Force that day, so it became round-the-clock bombing. The destruction was widespread and total. It was the pitiless philosophy of 20th century mechanized war, total war. The loss rate to the night bombers was much lower than by day, but despite that, the 8th Air Force decided to continue daylight operations with a demand for even tighter formations. They were devised by Colonel Curtis LeMay, known to his men as Iron Arse LeMay, and were designed to beat off the German fighters with concentrated firepower. But German fighters were far from intimidated. By the summer of 1943, they were inflicting terrifying losses on the 8th's new tighter formations. During 1 week in July, the 8th lost 100 bombers, 90 complete crews. No bomber force in the world could bear such losses. Many bombers only just made it home with an engine shot out. Many bombers brought back dead and wounded crewmen. The chances of completing a 25-mission tour unscathed seemed increasingly remote by the winter of 1943. Crew morale was at rock bottom. Clearly, the mighty 8th was losing the battle. The concept of daylight precision bombing, to which Spatz and Acre were committed, hung in the balance. It was a desperate crisis. US bomber crews were not trained or experienced in night flying and navigation. Nor was the aircraft, the B-17, designed or equipped with night operations in mind. The 8th Air Force was undoubtedly a remarkable achievement. Starting from scratch, it had become a major strike force. All that was in jeopardy. It's a story which had its beginnings way back at Boeing Field in Seattle. The prototype Type 299 was a private venture bomber by Boeing's. It was an unlikely venture. The US simply didn't have any enemies within range, and the Navy was responsible for offshore operations. But the Army eventually won a bitter struggle with the Navy, and the B-17 project went ahead, and it soon made the newsreels.
Flying fortresses of the Army, 22-ton monsters, each of which carries a bomb load of 2,500 pounds. Each is driven by 5,000 horsepower and has a radius of 3,500 miles. Formidable figures expressing power in a glowing sky.
When the American Defense Chief of Staff, General Marshall, observed the war games in the summer of 1941, he witnessed a commendably mechanized force in action, very much influenced by the 1940 concept of the German Blitzkrieg. Armour and artillery with close support air cover. But the role of the Army Air Corps had up till then been seen purely as a tactical bombing and reconnaissance force, with close cooperation between aircraft, armour and artillery on the ground. Though the Douglas A-24 dive bombers had nothing like the numbing power of the screaming German Stukas, which had blasted through Poland and France in 1940. In fact, the A-24 saw little active service with the Army, unlike this early sighting of the GP, or General Purpose Vehicle, or Jeep, which saw plenty. In March 1941, with Pearl Harbor 9 months away, President Roosevelt signed the powerful Lend-Lease Bill, which enabled the ostensibly neutral United States to supply Britain with badly needed weapons, including, as contemporary newsreels declared, military aircraft.
More bombers for Britain. With the President's plea spurring the aviation industry, the Lockheed plant goes all out in production of Hudson bombers for the RAF. Wings the British Lion wants and is getting special delivery.
Flying fortresses for Britain. Some were reported to have taken off only minutes after the President signed the Lend-Lease Bill.
This is a story that hasn't been told before. The RAF took 20 early B-17s and basically tested them in real combat over Europe and found them wanting. Flying at over 30,000 feet in the damp European air, instead of the dry bombing ranges in Arizona, everything froze solid. Guns, control surfaces, vital instruments. When they flew lower, these early B-17s with no rear gunners were easy meat for German fighters. Boeing went back to the drawing board to develop the design and improve its fighting capability. Meanwhile, Douglas had produced a prototype of the rival B-19 called the Super Bomber.
Perfect takeoff, and the big 2,300-pound wheels fold gracefully into the fuselage. Inside the B-19, Pilot Umstead is at the wheel. Everything is calm and casual. Or does that cigar indicate a little nervousness? Well, with 8,000 horsepower and a crew of 10 under your command, you might be nervous too, mister. Gun turrets are all over the B-19. Each wing also is designed to carry 6 bombs.
It was now clear that America would need a large, long-range bomber force, but it was by no means clear which aircraft would win out. It's now a matter of history that the big B-19 never went into production. Perhaps the handling told against the Douglas aircraft. This is certainly a landing to remember. But whatever the reason, the B-19 was ditched, and in the late summer of 1941, when America was being forced to look both ways, east towards an embattled Europe, and west towards an increasingly belligerent Japan, a flight of brand new B-17s flew out across the Pacific to Hickam Field, Hawaii.
After their 2,400-mile trip from the United States, 21 of the Army's flying fortresses line up for inspection at Hickam Field, Hawaii, one of the world's largest air bases. The huge Boeing B-17Ds are of the latest type, 5th of the Flying Fortress model. Their flight from San Francisco took only 13 hours and 59 minutes. Their presence here points up the importance that Washington attaches to maintaining United States power in the Pacific.
It was the signal for a massive program of rearming. Thousands of new aircraft would need tens of thousands of new aircrew. Since 1940, American flying schools had been training pilots for the RAF. Now, tens of thousands of young Americans of volunteering for pilot training. Nothing remotely like it had happened before in American history. The vast training machine began to churn out aircrew to go to war in the skies over Europe and over the Pacific.
Flying cadets of Uncle Sam's Air Force. From a nationwide network of civilian aviation schools supervised by the Army, they come to Randolph Field. After 10 weeks of primary training, they are ready for the West Point of the air. Randolph Field for the basic course, nearby Kelly Field for advanced students, combine to form the nerve center of America's Air Force training program. Expanding U.S. defense calls for the schooling of 30,000 pilots each year. There's plenty of room for young men, 20 to 26 years of age, with at least high school education, training for a peacetime profession or training to serve their country's defense. Meanwhile, Uncle Sam is building an Air Force to match any in the world.
In the summer of 1941, it seemed pretty much a game.
They wing their way to gunnery practice, and you'll see how skillful the sky shooting is. A sleeve target is released and towed near Galveston, Texas. They're to swoop down on that. Peeling off. In disciplined maneuver, the planes of the squadron swoop down on the target as it's towed along, a mark for bursts of machine gun fire. Like long experienced veterans of the Army Air Corps, yet they're Tensas National Guard aviators in training. They've learned the acrobatic art of air battle, how to shoot down a hostile warplane.
In December 1941, what had seemed a game became a grim reality.
The bombing of Honolulu as the Japanese, in their stroke of treachery, attacked the city. This is the Waikiki residential section, famed for beauty in the paradise of the Pacific. Vandal havoc wrought by the Japanese bombers. At the upper part of the screen, there you can see them. The people are bewildered by the blow without warning. Water main burst by bombs. These pictures give the city aspect of the sudden sky assault. The military phase, the damage at Pearl Harbor, cannot be shown, according to the principle of not revealing information that might be useful to the enemy.
Oh, 0800 hours local time, December the 7th, 1941. These are the scenes that, familiar today, were withheld from the newsreels. 3,000 American servicemen and civilians killed, 4 big American battleships sunk, 4 more badly damaged, 10 other capital ships lost. Most of the B-17s flown to Hickam Field were among the 350 American aircraft destroyed on the ground on that day. The stream of trainees for aircrew became a flood tide. Spectacular flypasts of graduated cadets became the common stuff of newsreels. And the bombers needed skilled navigators. All US Air Force pilots and navigators were commissioned officers, while the tradesmen were enlisted men. Hundreds of thousands of skilled men had to be trained to service an eventual 15 US Air Forces worldwide. You have woken a sleeping giant, Admiral Yamamoto warned the Japanese War Cabinet after Pearl Harbor. He was correct. No country on earth could challenge the United States in industrial production. And the no longer sleeping giant began to churn out engines and aircraft on an unprecedented scale.
First time in the air, the world's mightiest bomber, B-17, newest air fighter for the U.S. Army and the RAF, is filmed from a United airliner.
This was the prototype of the definitive wartime fortress, the B-17E, improved after the combat experience gained from the RAF. Moreover, the B-17 was joined by a second heavy, the B-24 Liberator.
A giant Army B-24 bomber arrives for inspection by 78-year-old Henry Ford. Bodies for the big ships will soon roll off Ford assembly lines. Edsel Ford reveals that a few hundred Ford engineers have been in California getting production details for Father Henry.
This B-24 Liberator is taking off to join the RAF's Coastal Command for convoy protection, utilising this bomber's very long range, while a B-17 in full war paint follows, bound for England and the 8th Army Air Force, which was now planning audacious raids deep into occupied Europe, like the vast oil complex at Ploiești in distant Romania. Out of range of bombers flying directly from England, but just within range of aircraft flying via newly occupied North Africa. These remarkable pictures are the only ones to have survived one of the most daring raids of the entire war. The strike force of nearly 180 aircraft flew at treetop height to get beneath the enemy radar, right across southern Europe, heading for the vital center of Hitler's oil supplies. They found the target, but confused communications and the sheer difficulty of identifying the precise bits of this vast complex at high speed, at low level, played havoc with the raid. The bombers flew on, but the intense flak caused very heavy losses. The camera ship is rocked by an exploding American bomb just below it. The surviving bombers head for home, leaving blazing oil tanks below. Not all the assigned targets had been attacked, but the price in men and planes was huge. The track was marked by the fires of destroyed aircraft. German films record the post-raid damage. Some parts of the refinery were very severely damaged. But it would have to be attacked again. To the Germans came the realization that no target in their fortress Europe was immune from daylight attack by the Allied bomber fleets. But for the 8th Air Force, the losses were awesome. 52 of the attacking force did not return. 520 aircrew killed or missing on just one raid. Even the surviving bombers, climbing up over the Ionian Sea, heading back to their bases, many were damaged beyond repair. All nursing their engines to squeeze maximum range out of these aircraft. When the B-24s of the 8th returned to their bases in the UK, they had survived one of the landmark raids of the war, a raid that would go down in history. But it was a bittersweet occasion. No fewer than 30 of the mighty 8's aircraft failed to make it. No less than 5 aircrew won Congressional Medals of Honor, the highest American military decoration, 2 posthumously. The leader of the 8th Air Force Group on this audacious raid, Colonel Leon Johnson, receives his Medal of Honor. It was the highest number of awards granted to any mission during World War II. Any aircraft that survived the raid carried the symbol with pride. This bomber, Boomerang, lived up to its name. It always came back. The crew had a lot to celebrate. They had become members of what was called the Lucky Bastards Club, crews that had completed a full 25-mission operational tour. Boomerang's crew get the full treatment with a special cake to celebrate their good fortune. A short speech of thanks to the ground crews and those who helped to keep the ship airborne, on whom every aircrew depended for their lives. Lucky bastards were indeed lucky. They had bucked the lengthening odds against surviving a complete tour in the winter of 1943. And like the Memphis Belle before her, the reward is a hero's return to the peaceful skies of America. No more flak, no more cannon shells. The 4 engines fire into life, and the battered veteran enters the Hardwick runway for her final mission. Goodbye the mighty 8th, next stop America. But for the aircrews of the 8th, there was no breaking the routine. These bombers were being prepared for yet another raid. Maximum effort was the order, as war-weary crews and war-weary aircraft were ordered to distant German targets. The B-24s now had power-operated front gun turrets to deal with deadly head-on fighter attacks. Even so, as the pilots lifted their heavy bombers into the grey, cloud-covered skies, they knew the score. Daylight bombing was immensely costly in both men and machines. During a second raid on the vital ball bearing plant at Schweinfurt, losses were so severe that all operations were suspended to allow depleted groups to be reformed. Despite the immense bravery and dedication of the American aircrews, daylight bombing against the fighters of the Luftwaffe hung in the balance. These gunners cocked their guns in readiness. Beneath the overcast, Luftwaffe fighters are scrambled. On the seemingly endless approach to the target, the bombers have to fly straight and level. As the bombardier opens the bomb doors, flak erupts over the target. Fighters making a beam attack. Gunners desperately defend, waiting for the call, bombs away. As the formation leader releases the bombs and marker flares to the target, all formation bombardiers follow his lead to ensure maximum concentration of bombs on the target. But the daring German fighters swoop in to attack the bombers with undiminished ferocity, right over the target with their deadly 20mm cannon. The fighters fly close to try to break up the formations. A Focke-Wulf 190 is hit. As a gunner claims the hit, the captain calls on a crewman to confirm. No doubt about that one, the pilot has bailed out. At last the formation turns for England and the home airfield. Another fighter hit. It arcs down through the formation. As a B-24 goes down. And a B-17 limps home. Many bombers land with dead and injured crews, with aircraft that are beyond repair. Crews hack at a damaged aircraft to allow medics to attend men who are trapped inside. A B-24 with a shut-up undercarriage makes an emergency landing and skids off the runway. The pilot thankful for the Liberator's toughness. But now it was clear to all that losses on this scale had become unsustainable. There were only two options: either reduce the scale of operations drastically or abandon daylight operations altogether and join the RAF in its mounting night offensive. However, there was in fact a third option, presented by the arrival of long-range escort fighters. The best escort fighter of the entire war, the P-51 Mustang. a range of 1,500 miles and a speed of 440 miles an hour, Mustangs could outpace any German piston-engine fighters. These aircraft suddenly provided the solution. With long-range auxiliary tanks, they could escort the bombers all the way to Berlin and back, and still have sufficient fuel for combat. It was the turning of the tide, to which the Germans would have no counter. So a new strategy emerged. The fighters' close support would radically reduce bombers' losses, but the superiority of the escort fighters was such that they could in effect challenge the Luftwaffe into a battle of attrition, a battle which the Germans could not possibly win. Luftwaffe pilots did not, like Allied pilots, fly fixed tours. They flew until they were killed or injured. The old ones were combat weary, the young inexperienced, though they all fought with courage and dedication. But now the feared Focke-Wulf 190, the Butcher Bird, was to meet its match. The hunters became the hunted. 8th Air Force fighter pilots, flying well above the bomber formations, waited up-sun for the climbing German attackers. Outflown and outgunned, the German fighters were drawn again and again into some of the greatest air battles ever fought or likely to be fought. Among the American fighter aces, one was to become well known for his exploits after the war, as Colonel Chuck Yeager, the first to break the sound barrier. There were many other aces, forcing the German fighters out of the conflict. From ground level to the freezing skies above 30,000 feet, there was no escape. There were still bomber losses. The tighter formation required for good fighter defense meant that the flat box barrage through which the bombers had to fly claimed many casualties. But the German fighters could no longer decimate the formations, bombing German aircraft and oil plants. By mid-1944, any plant supplying the German Air Force was targeted. Aero engine and airframe factories were bombed to destruction. Synthetic oil plants, making vital aircraft fuel, were hit. Bombers flattened Ploiești, completing the attack begun by the 8th in 1943. The Germans, by brilliant dispersal strategies, actually increased fighter production in 1944. But there was little fuel to fly them with, or to train replacement pilots. But the Germans still had some remarkable surprises in their arsenal.
Die ewige Forderung des Krieges und der Fliegerei. Schneller, höher, stärker.
One was the 600 miles an hour rocket-powered Messerschmitt 163, the Comet, which could soar to well over 30,000 feet. Then, its fuel exhausted, it was intended to turn and engage the bomber fleets in a high-speed dive. The plant making its fuel was bombed. 163 was grounded. The Me-262 was altogether a more formidable machine, the world's first twin-engine jet fighter. This sleek, shark-nosed fighter had a top speed of over 530 miles an hour, so it could outpace any Allied fighter and could well have devastated the bombing fleets. No less than 1,400 of these aircraft were produced, but Hitler had dictated it be used as a bomber. By late 1944, when that order was reversed, it was too late. There were too few of these magnificent machines to affect the balance of air power. After the war, General Gallon, the German fighter chief, said that if he'd had the 262 in 1943, which would have been possible, he could have stopped the bombing campaign in its tracks. Other tactical options open to the German fighter controllers were ignored. They could have attacked the long-range escort fighters as they crossed the German frontier, forcing them to jettison their drop tanks. That would have left them with insufficient range to penetrate deep into Germany, and so leaving the bombers undefended. German fighter bombers could even have attacked the vulnerable US airfields, all of which were well within range. Neither of these tactics was ever implemented. With fewer and fewer enemy fighters getting airborne, the US escort fighters were ordered to attack targets of opportunity. Anything that moved was a target. It was a license to create mayhem among enemy vehicles of every kind. As D-Day approached, the mighty 8th became a major tactical support force. They attacked troop concentrations, supply dumps, fortifications on the coast of northern France, all to prepare for Operation Overlord, D-Day, the 6th of June 1944, the liberation of occupied Europe, the greatest combined landing assault in all of military history. Medium Mitchell bombers of the Tactical Air Force attacked with little fighter opposition, thanks to the 8th's massive daylight offensive against the enemy infrastructure. The results of the ground battles were dependent on air superiority, which the Allies had achieved. German armour was devastated from the air. By February of 1945, the Allies had reached the Rhine. In close support, bombers of the 8th dropped supplies for the paratroops on the ground, going in against intense fire from German defences. The massive force of airborne troops in gliders were towed directly from the English bases into their assault landing zones. A highly symbolic moment. A lone B-24 bomber of the 8th crosses the Rhine unopposed, followed by others attacking German targets right up to the end of the European War. A flight of bombers of the 8th peels off after their final mission over mainland Europe. The European War was over. The English countryside, which had become so familiar a refuge to American crews, was, after 6 years of war, at peace. In Germany, the destruction wrought by the bombing armadas was, in the words of the English historian A.J.P. Taylor, on a scale that would have appalled Attila. Total war had laid waste countless cities. Strategic bombing had not by itself won the war, but it had made a major contribution in first stopping the enemy advance and then allowing the Allied armies to invade. When the 8th was stood down in July 1945, it had flown nearly 11,000 missions. It was a mighty air force of over 4,000 heavy bombers, not to mention its fighter wings. It had achieved the objective of dismantling the German war machine. But the price had been colossal. 5,500 bombers destroyed, over 55,000 young men had given their lives. The 6th of August, 1945. The atom bomb is detonated over Hiroshima from a B-29 bomber flown by Colonel Tibbett, who had flown on the 8th's very first raid. The beginning and the end of American bombing in World War II.